who is a homeless entrepreneur. He asked, how can the three panellists collaborate to improve the state of housing for all the children, families and single individuals experiencing homelessness in the UK? Now, the Minister sort of didn't want to make homelessness almost about housing, did he? He sort of wanted to broaden it out to be about mental health and other issues, which of course I'm sure are part of the picture, but do you agree with him, or maybe I'll go straight to you?
I was talking to Andrew earlier, and he's looked at homelessness all over the world, and it's, you know, the issues, it's wherever you are, homelessness is an issue, but he was particularly interested in how we deal with it in this country. In my role as a council leader, we've developed a whole housing first policy, which meant making sure people have a roof over their head. We've used a mixture of MMC, so modern method of construction housing, and we built a whole new unit recently, of a 29 room. They're all independent units, so they're all self-contained, and we give a whole package of support that goes with them to help homelessness people with whatever their issues are that have led to them being homelessness. It can be drug, alcohol, other addictions. It can be mental health. It can be financial capability. It can be a whole mixture of all of those. But you know, making sure that they get access to support with that while they've got a roof over their head, so they can, you know, make sure they're fit to or ready to make a change to their life, has been really important to us. And you know, homelessness is absolutely part of the housing crisis. The number of homeless people I speak to who, you know, quite often it will be a relationship breakup, for example, nothing to do with any issues of complex needs in their life. They have a relationship breakup, and then one side of the partnership doesn't get housing, the other side does, and then you've got a problem on your hands. So I think we've got to look at this in a much more holistic way, and I think we need to do far more. I can remember, this was many years ago now, so I don't want to point the finger at my council, but many years ago they came to me with a homelessness policy, and I said to them, how many homeless people have you included talking about this policy before you brought it to us? And they hadn't talked to any homeless people at all. So I think it's really important that we engage a whole variety of people, because they're all homeless for different reasons, as we put our housing policy or our homelessness policies together. But leaving people on the streets in this century is totally unacceptable. One of my big missions with the Levelling Up Bill was to get rid of the Vagrancy Act, which has been there since 1824 and criminalises homeless people. It criminalised 2,000 people last year. We still haven't scrapped it. We didn't get the government to do it as part of the Levelling Up Bill. They've promised us they'll do it within 12 months. No sign of it so far, but I shall keep on the case of that. It's not criminal to be homeless. It's because, you know, you've had some problems that you haven't been able to deal with.
What about you, Kath? What would you like to see happening to on this area?
Well, one of the really shocking things about the homelessness situation is that local authorities have a duty to house many homeless families, and in a lot of places there's no social housing, so they put them in so-called temporary accommodation, which can be temporary temporary is the wrong word. I've interviewed people who have been living in the same temporary accommodation flat for 12 years, and there was no prospect of them leaving. Now, a lot of this TA is provided by private landlords. So on the one side, the government has brought in a number of tax changes and regulation changes that have the effect of incentivizing landlords to leave the sector or to move into short-term lets. On the other hand, we're relying on them to provide temporary accommodation for homeless households and hopefully longer-term accommodation for these households. Those two things are contradictory.
Yeah, I'm sure Ben would like to speak to that. Are landlords prepared to take, for example, someone on housing benefit? Is that something that they've traditionally been a bit wary of?
Well, yes, and to be clear, no landlord should discriminate on any circumstances, let alone housing benefit or universal credit or families or kids. Let's just get that out there straight away. But the reality is, with the supply crisis as it stands, for those marginalised groups or those groups at the bottom of the rung, will struggle to find accommodation against a backdrop of 25 applications per property. That's the reality of where we're at, folks, and that's why we do need to take some pretty bold steps to increase housing supply. And you can do that in a number of ways. You can increase social housing and commit to a campaign of one-to-one, which we would absolutely support. That's why we're in this mess, because we flogged it all off and haven't replaced it. And we run the risk of doing the same again with the private rented sector. Obviously, if another landlord buys it, I get it, it doesn't disappear, it stays there. But the problem is that we're shuffling the same pack of cards. We're not increasing the cards, and that's exactly what we need to do to address some of these issues. I don't think I represent landlords that provide temporary accommodation. I see all the same stuff as you. My members provide, on average, 8 properties each in the private rented sector, and I expect them, to do so to a high standard. Otherwise, they have no part to play. The rules around temporary accommodation and the quality that I hear around temporary accommodation is unacceptable. And people should not be living in temporary accommodation for months and years on end. That's just absolutely nonsensical to me. But the way that these things have panned out with greater intervention is that we've sort of driven some of these things. It's frankly, it's a political decision that people are homeless. We took people in off the streets during COVID. We can do it again if we want to pay for it. It's a political choice. I get that it costs a lot of money, but that's the reality. So the way I see these things panning out are not around banning things or making it so difficult for people to operate. It's about nudging the right sorts of behaviour, punishing bad behaviour from property owners if they're not doing the right sorts of things, but having a framework that landlords and tenants can exist collectively. And the question was about collaboration. Actually, the private rented sector has higher satisfaction than the social rented sector, for example. And so I don't buy this argument that tenants and landlords are in a state of perpetual conflict. I think it's sometimes a very easy place to default to. So we need to put our kind of vested interests to one side. I want a thriving and healthy private rented sector. I think everybody else on the panel does here. There are different ways of achieving it, but sort of kind of failed ideologies and putting them out there are not helpful to the debate. Neither is sort of government messaging around immigration and right to rent checks. We've got a responsibility with our language, and there's a massive opportunity, I think, now to really take some bold steps, because if we don't, I genuinely don't know where people are going to end up living, and that's a real worry to me and everybody in this room, I'm sure.
And staying with this sort of legal framework within which tenants and landlords should be able to coexist. You mentioned that you're sort of broadly on board with the Renters Reform Act.